Since starting this channel many years ago, I've had the privilege and honor of learning a lot about many historical figures and so many videos and so many cool historical figures that I wouldn't have otherwise without this channel ever have really learned about. And usually when I'm learning about these historical figures, I feel like most of the time I'm able to form opinions, very solidified opinions that usually don't change. And the words I use are mostly I like this guy or I dislike this guy. I feel like most historical figures we covered usually always fall into one of these two categories. For instance, I like this guy, Hannibal Barca, but that was even before this channel, or like Alexander the Great or Napoleon, etc. And I feel like a lot of historical figures I've seen kind of go into the like category, as I like to call it. And then there's the other category I also use, which is the dislike category of historical figures I just end up disliking, and in my opinion, seldom change. Such as, for instance, Hanno II, who I really dislike. So, yeah, and there are little subcategories I also have, like the historical figure I feared the most, Timur, for obvious reasons, and the historical figure who I'm most disappointed in, or who was the biggest disappointment I've ever had to learn about, Antiochus III, also known as the Great. But there is another category that I've kind of mentioned a few times on this channel, and I call it the neutral category of historical figures who I was either unable to get a solid opinion of and who kind of fluctuate, or that I dislike qualities about them, but I like other qualities, but I'm not able to fully pinpoint whether I dislike or like them, so they fall in the neutral category. And at the moment, there are only three historical figures in the neutral category for me. The first being Julius Caesar. For whatever reason, I was never able to like or dislike Julius Caesar. He just always falls into the middle, neutral category for me. The next is Suleiman the Magnificent, who I started off liking, but after watching that extra history series about him, I ended up kind of, he fell into the middle category, the neutral, as you can watch my reaction to that to find out why. And finally, the subject of this video being Frederick the Great, who is the third and final member of my neutral category, a figure who I'm not able to say I like or dislike him, and the reason is it's a bit complicated, unlike the other two. It's a bit more complicated because I've covered Frederick the Great on this channel. We saw the House of History series, Frederick the Great, Life of War, and I also covered the Rise of Prussia, and he even appeared in the Catherine the Great extra history series. So Frederick, or Old Freddy Boy as I like to call him, has appeared a few times on this channel, and on paper, I should really dislike him because for those of you who may have seen or not seen, I covered a video series about the Austrian Habsburgs by Old Britannia, and I got to learn about Maria Theresa, the Theresa. Apologies for the last name pronunciation, but point is, she was, yeah, like the empress of the Austrian Habsburg Empire, and she inherited her reign in a really tough time. Austria was basically falling apart, and through sheer force of will and great leadership, she managed to keep Austria afloat. And Maria Theresa is a figure who was firmly in the like category for me because I really liked her, and I really do like the Austrian Habsburg Empire. Like, maybe it's because they give me the underdog vibe. They're always kind of going through bad crap every time we cover them. They were losing, so like I kind of like the Austrian Habsburgs fall are like underdogs to me, and I like to root for an underdog. And it was during this time that I think was one of my earlier instances of covering Frederick the Great, where he essentially just stole Silesia. I think it's what it was called, the disputed territory. I think that's what it was called. But either way, he stole Silesia, like essentially kicking the Austrians when they were down. And then just stuff like that, like which kind of I thought was beyond messed up. I was like, holy crap, what a jerk. And then other qualities about him, like kind of just making alliances and just going behind his allies' back to make peace treaties without consulting them, and stuff like that. Like little stuff like that is like, dang, this guy kind of sucks. He's kind of a jerk, you know. And so on paper, I felt like I should have because, for instance, he, yeah, had some rather unsavory qualities, and he kind of messed with someone who I did like, being Maria Theresa and the Austrians, who I think got screwed over big time and essentially got Silesia stolen from them. But the reason why, and if Frederick the Great had gotten away with that without any repercussions, I think I would have probably been like, yeah, I dislike the guy, just firmly put him in that category. But the reason I don't is because from covering the Life of War, House of History series, that I ended up really softening up towards Frederick the Great. The reason is because I compared him to Odysseus from the famous Greek hero from the Odyssey. Very topical at the moment. And as someone who, well, you could judge with qualities about good and bad. Like, obviously, I know that a lot of Odysseus is a bit of a mixed guy, really, and someone who kind of may have also played a part in some of their own hardships, and who ultimately went through a lot, suffered so much that it's almost hard to not root for them to want to get a break. And so yeah, I compared Frederick the Great to Odysseus by the end of that series. It's because it feels like karma really struck him hard. Like Frederick the Great and what he did ultimately came back to bite him in the butt, and the whole entire 7 Years' War was karma hitting Frederick the Great. He stole Silesia and then proceeded to piss off allies like France by going behind their back and making peace offers. And so essentially, Austria was able to form a coalition of France, Russia, and Austria themselves to attack Frederick. So it's like Frederick is an interesting guy because he did something which I think was messed up and ultimately suffered for it. Like the 7 Years' War was just one giant karma hitting the guy back, and he went through so much, like losing so much of his, losing relatives during that time of his life, going through in extreme amounts of stress and setbacks and losses, ultimately developing like depression and like suicidal thoughts, which, as someone who's been through suicidal thoughts and depression, I think those are the worst feelings you can ever have as a person. And if you never had them, consider yourself fortunate. But ultimately, I kind of started to, I guess, sympathize or empathize with Frederick kind of through that. I'm like, dang, this guy's suffering a lot. And again, you could say it was kind of deserved. He kind of brought it on himself with some of his earlier actions in life. But then I just kind of was like, holy crap. You can actually see my reactions to the House of History series about Frederick, and by the end I was like, dude, like, can this guy catch a break? Like I really was like, he suffered enough. And so ultimately, did he get to keep Silesia? Yes. Did he win the 7 Years' Wars? Yes. But he's a guy who I think suffered for so much of what he did earlier on in life that it's okay. I think he, I guess, yeah, like karma struck him, and that he ultimately, in my opinion, suffered and paid for everything enough. And so by the end of the 7 Years' War, and not just because of his suffering that my feelings towards him softened, but because I admired his perseverance. You know, the 7 Years' War, those 7 years were, yeah, the worst, arguably probably some of the worst years of his life. You know, losing so much, going through so much, but yet the guy just kept going. He kept enduring, and he never, while I feel like he never dominated the war in the vein of like a Napoleon would have dominated their respective wars, he ultimately persevered, and despite taking a good amount of L's, like he lost a few times, pretty big, and even some of his victories came at great cost to his own manpower, ultimately always kept going, and despite being in the worst mental and situations of his life, endured. And ultimately, I found that very inspiring. You know, someone who suffers and goes through some of the worst years of their life, but fortune turned for him, and through miracles, essentially, like Paul taking control of Russia, etc., the coalition falling apart, he was able to overcome the worst years of his life and come out on the other side victorious. You know, very inspiring to me as someone who's been going through the worst years of his life for the past 5 years. So, ultimately, all these qualities essentially balance Frederick out from the dislike category to the neutral. You know, I still think what he did was messed up, some of his earlier actions, like especially towards like Austria and Maria Theresa, but I think he went through enough to where it's like, cut the guy a break, you know? In my opinion, that's how I feel at least. So he balances out to the neutral as things I like a lot of things about him, and there's some things I'm not chill with, so he ultimately falls in the neutral category for me. So those are my incredibly complex feelings and my incredibly long mindset towards Frederick the Great. I apologize for all the yapping. I just really wanted to share about my category system and why I feel about how I do with Frederick. And I can't wait to watch this series by Extra History about Frederick the Great. I think he ultimately deserves the title the Great. There are historical figures who I think don't deserve that title, like Hanno II, and in my opinion, Antiochus the third. So, oh boy. But point is, I think Frederick definitely deserves his title, the Great. He really was great. So, I don't really have much else to say other than we should probably get to it. I've talked enough. So, if you want to watch the original video by Extra History, the link is down in the description down below. And if you enjoy my channel and you want to help me out in any way, shape, or form, feel free to please like, comment, subscribe, and consider becoming a YouTube Patreon member. It would really help me out a lot. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's do.
Fortress of Kustrin, Brandenburg, November 6th, 1730. Frederick, Crown Prince of Brandenburg, Prussia, looks through the bars of his cell windows as soldiers lead his companion, Hans Hermann von Katte, to the Mound of Sand. Katte is more than his friend. He's the 18-year-old Frederick's confidant, his protector, and some say his lover. And he had tried to save Frederick from his father, the King of Prussia. And Katte would pay. "Please forgive me, dear Katte," Frederick yells in French, the language they both prefer. "In God's name, forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," Katte answers in the same language. "I'd die for you with joy in my heart." The headsman steps up,
Holy
revealing his
crap.
axe. Frederick doesn't want to watch, but two soldiers, acting on his father's orders, grab hold of him and press his face to the bar.
Yeah, we covered this from the Kings and Generals Rise of Prussia series, and holy crap. Yeah, that's the thing. Frederick never, well, he had a wife, he just did not apparently like her, you know? And apparently a theory that's been proposed is that he was gay. So he wasn't interested in women. So, yeah, again, that's a, I guess, theory? I don't know. From what I've seen, there's no, historians are a bit mixed on it, but either way, this is still such an awful thing. And yeah, his dad, like, really, holy crap, put him through it in his youth.
He screams, he fights, the axe raises over Katte's bare neck, and mercifully, the boy who would become Prussia's greatest king faints before he sees it fall. thanks so much to HelloFresh for continuing to help us bring history to the table. Hey everyone, as you can probably tell already, Frederick the Great's childhood was a horror show of abuse and homophobic bullying by his father. So with today's episode, viewer discretion is advised. Frederick the Great is one of the most dynamic monarchs of the 18th century. Inheriting a fractured piece of the Holy Roman Empire, a place so minor, its monarch was called King in Prussia rather than King of Prussia. He expanded it to a major power. Known as a soldier and a philosopher, his reign simultaneously encompassed refinement and brutality, demonstrating both the splendor and slaughter of the Enlightenment. Yet his first battle was not against the Habsburgs or France, but rather his own dad. Frederick's father, Frederick William, was known as the Soldier King. Living in a sparse militaristic fashion, he despised anything he considered ostentatious or effeminate. In fact, his first act upon becoming the king in Prussia and the Elector of Brandenburg was to sell his own father's jewels, horses, and fine furnishings. While many German princes used the treasury as their personal party fund, Frederick William instead pursued a conservative economic policy, curtailing state spending and battling corruption, which was a wise thing overall, but many of the unnecessary expenses he eliminated included patronage of the arts, literature, and science. Like, he didn't just defund the Prussian Academy of Sciences, he closed it. But Frederick William did have one pet project, the army. So everything he saved.
Again, yeah, he's called like militaristic king, and yeah, you can see that. I think I think Frederick was a much better blend, because he was cultured, as the kids tend to say, and, and I think it's kind of like a good balance to, yeah, be strong, but also, yeah, you should advance the arts and education and all the other stuff. It's just good for culture and society, I think. It's a benefit, really, in my opinion. So, definitely, I remember Frederick's father from this series. Kind of, yeah, again, like a figure of, like, yeah, an awful father, don't get me wrong. Like, awful, but, yeah, as a ruler, like, I do think he did do pretty good for Prussia, and I guess the biggest good that he did in the long run was kind of investing in the military, because when he died, Frederick the Great did inherit a pretty strong, disciplined military from his dad, so, which did help him later on in life. So in the long run, I guess you can say it was good, but obviously not the best quality to ignore the arts and the finer things completely, which is a bad thing. But in the long run, it ultimately worked out due to Frederick. And yeah.
He poured into defense spending. He also created a new type of military draft, the canton system, that allowed Prussia to be able to recruit and train troops more efficiently and create civilian reservists that could be called upon. In that way, he doubled the size of the Prussian military to 76,000 men, making it the fourth largest army in Europe, roughly the same as that of France, which had 10 times Prussia's population.
Dang.
Oh, did this guy love the army. He dressed as a military officer, held meetings in rooms where he could watch troops drilling out his window, and in an additional extreme, drafted the tallest men in the Holy Roman Empire into a special unit of giants. In fact, his council was so full of soldiers swilling beer and smoking foot-long pipes that it was nicknamed the Tobacco Cabinet, mostly because their meeting room smelt like an airport smoking lounge. He also was prone to violent rages, which got worse as the years went on, and had several medical conditions that kept him in constant pain. In other words, Frederick William projected an air of hypermasculinity, Calvinist piety, and frugal financial habits. And naturally, he wanted his eldest surviving son Frederick, nicknamed Fritz, to grow up to be just like him, a hyper-virile religious soldier king, to use the great instrument of Prussian military power that he'd created. Now, the first 6 years of Fritz's life, he'd lived with his mother, and under her care, young Fritz developed what his father considered worrying habits. Fritz loved music and books. He grew incredibly close to his older sister Wilhelmina, enjoyed poetry, philosophy, opera, and learned to play the flute. Worse than that, it was the transverse flute, recently invented in France. Oh, Frederick William hated flute.
I remember covering this. I think it was from the Rise of Prussia series from Kings and generals, and holy crap. Like I said, I think it's cool to be cultured and like that. But yeah, his dad, holy crap. That's the trigger word. When he found out it was from the French, he's like, that's it, no more.
France, and was known to fly into a rage if the country was even mentioned. The French, he said, were decadent and effeminate. So imagine his consternation when Fritz, who was tutored in French and German simultaneously, took to French as his first language and struggled with his native German. Okay, all right, not a big deal. The boy Frederick William reasoned just needed to find the fun in war, you know? So, for his 6th birthday, he gave him a miniature arsenal of military rifles and cannons, plus a group of boys in uniform he was supposed to order around as living toy soldiers. Ha ha, pretty cool, eh, Fritz? Fritz? You no? It's fine, it's fine.
Yeah, if Total War existed back then, I feel like he would only make sure his son played Total War and no other games. You know? And that's very interesting. I said, I don't know the full dynamics of their relationship, but if he really wanted Frederick to be more like him, I'm surprised he didn't, like, more directly take him under his wing, in a sense. You know, like, he mentioned him being with his mom most of his, I guess, more upbringing educational system, which is interesting. I've been wondering if you know, his dad was just too busy, or not, because you think he would want to be more direct and have his son more near him, because again, like, you know, like, kind of introduce him into the military thing much more sooner, expose him to it much more sooner, so maybe he might take a liking to it more. I mean, granted, I know that doesn't guarantee anything. Like you can expose your kid to something and they still just might not always fully take to it, but it doesn't. And that's not the impression I got from it. It seems like he's trying to more course correct later on, after Frederick kind of had already established his liking towards the finer things in life. So now it seems like he's trying to course correct and be like, no, you gotta like the military more, you know? You gotta play some Total War with me, which is a really fun game. So, I'm sorry, I always bring up Total War because I'm a big Total War Rome 2 player, but yeah. So, either way, I'm like wondering if he would want why he didn't be more direct, but maybe he was just too busy, or maybe he just thought his mother could handle the job. I don't know.
Because Frederick William would soon also shape his son more directly. For as was tradition, the next year when he turned 7, the responsibility for raising and educating Fritz transferred from his mother to his father.
Okay, that explains all of my questions. Never mind, guys. Okay, so that's just how things. It's kind of like Sparta, isn't it? It's like Spartans. What, when they reach like what, 7 or 8, then they're kind of taken away from home to be trained, or at least that's the famous way it's always told. Huh, because I was wondering, like, why didn't he just take more direct control off the bat? Like, seemed like, and just bring Frederick into the army and expose him nothing to that, but okay, never mind. This answers all of my questions. So, yeah. So, yeah.
As responsibility for raising and educating Fritz
Okay. Old Fritz, old Fritz.
transferred from his mother to his father. As you can imagine, all studies of music, philosophy, and poetry were promptly shut down. The prince would instead now have a grueling, regimented schedule of Latin, religious studies, ancient classics, modern political history, and military subjects, conducted largely by military officers. But even there, Fritz found allies. His Latin tutor was sympathetic to his clearly bright charge, and not only procured him a flute, but helped him amass a secret library of 3,000 books covering poetry, Enlightenment philosophy, and art.
Wow.
Fritz also visited a nearby court in Saxony, which gave him a glimpse of a freer life than he'd had. Yet as Frederick grew into a teenager, Frederick William became increasingly furious over his heir, who he considered effeminate, incompetent, and irreligious, as it was increasingly clear that Fritz was an agnostic. So he responded with a campaign of abuse. Frederick William berated his son, screaming at him in front of soldiers. He burned books and artwork he found, and assaulted him in public. He would strike young Frederick for sleeping in and being late for drill, or for being unsure on horseback. Once, he beat him with a cane for wearing a pair of gloves when it was cold. "If I had disgraced my father so," he once told Fritz, "I would have killed myself."
Holy
Then,
crap.
when Fritz was 16 and formed an intimate relationship with one of his father's pages, Frederick William had the young man sent to a border posting and beat his son again, calling him a sodomite. Now, a quick aside here. The language surrounding Frederick's sexuality can be a hot-button topic among historians. Not whether he was gay. He clearly was attracted to men, preferred male partners, and commissioned art with homoerotic themes. The debate is more about terminology. Whether labels like gay are imposing a modern idea of sexuality on a very different time and culture. But let's be honest, in history, it's already common to use a ton of terms like feudalism or democracy to describe things that existed but didn't yet have labels, and queer people existed then as they always have. So with all that in mind, Frederick was gay, and his sexuality definitely made it dangerous for him to live under Frederick William. At this point, he had only one hope to escape his father: a double marriage. See, his mother had been planning to marry his sister Wilhelmina and him to the children of her brother George II of England. Fritz was all about this. He could go to England, which was far freer than Prussia. And look, if he had to get married to get away from his father, that was a small price. But when that deal fell apart due to intrigue and shifts in alliances, he plunged into despair. That was when Kata, his friend, tutor, and likely lover, agreed to help him escape. They would slip away while touring the Holy Roman Empire and flee together to England, though they were caught almost immediately and thrown into prison. Given both were military officers, Frederick William charged them with treason and seriously considered having Fritz executed, but that put him on rocky legal ground with the rest of the empire. So in the end, his punishment was to watch Kata die. Afterward, Frederick made a deal with his father. In return for a pardon and getting to stay crown prince, he submitted to an even more grueling and austere routine of tutors. He also swore to be a good Protestant and agreed to marry. So, he entered an engagement with Elizabeth Christine, a Protestant cousin of the Habsburg line. Though Frederick was despondent
Yeah, again, awful fodder. Just awful fodder.
over this choice, and swearing that even friendship between them was impossible, he threatened suicide, however still had no choice in the marriage. But he knew the only way out was through. Frederick wept upon meeting her, and on their wedding night, loitered in their bedroom for an hour before abruptly leaving to stroll the grounds until dawn. But no matter, he was safe, he was free, and he only needed to wait until the Soldier King died, and when he took power, he would never be beaten again. For in a surprise to all, Frederick William's tutelage had taken root, and his son would be a warrior king like Prussia had never seen. And while we wait to find out what
Yeah, I guess in a weird way, his dad kind of succeeded in a sense. Like, sure, Frederick wasn't the exact splitting image in a sense of someone just only obsessed with the military mainly, but again, I think Frederick had a good balance of culture and military strength, which overall would serve to be good for Prussia in the long run. So, you know. Overall, I guess you can say in a weird way it worked, because Frederick the Great is a very renowned military commander, so I guess. Even though it had to be through some of the worst abuse he could inflict, like holy crap, but oh well. Yeah, it's hard not to be sympathetic towards Frederick.
The Rhine, April 1734. It's the War of Polish Succession, and Frederick, Crown Prince of Prussia, is trying to be the man his father wants him to be. Though court-martialed after his attempted escape to England, he's been restored to military rank in order to gain battlefield experience. But this is not how you run an army. Frederick is embedded with the forces of the Holy Roman Empire, confronting the French under the famed general, Prince Eugene of Savoy. Yet Eugene is
Very interesting, Eugene of Savoy. I'm actually currently covering his series right now. The first part released, what, last time? So, very interesting to see Yuji boy here.
a fated hero. He can pass wisdom and experience to Frederick, sure, but he's also 70, frail, and can barely remember his last conversation. He's cautious and defensive, afraid to act. His body was still there, Frederick later observed, but his soul had gone. And the Imperial Army, well, it was weak, disorganized, and fractious. I could defeat this enemy, Frederick muses, and he would get his chance. For this terrorized prince was about to start a fire that would burn through Europe and the world. Say, would you happen to want to watch the next episode of this series immediately after watching this one instead of having to wait a full week? Well, now with the new Nebula First, you totally can. Learn how to get access through the Curiosity Stream Nebula bundle after the episode. At the end of last week's episode, Frederick decided to play the role of the dutiful son, and wait until his ill father died. He submitted to a new regime of tutors that focused on making him masculine, agreed to marry a woman he detested, and went to war. But a strange thing happened. Frederick actually became a pretty good soldier. As colonel of a regiment, he developed a fascination with strategy, battlefield tactics, and leadership. And while he never truly saw any action during the War of Polish Succession, he acquitted himself honorably. When he returned, his father, Frederick William, now confined to a wheelchair by gout, reconciled with his son. Proud of Frederick's progress, he gave him a lakeside castle where he could indulge in artistic pursuits in private. Frederick and his wife.
Wow. That's actually kind of not... Huh. That's actually a really nice little moment there. Holy crap.
Wife, Elizabeth Christine, moved in, though in truth he largely kept clear of her. There, he read books, staged plays with friends, played the flute, set up a regular discussion group on military strategy, and recruited architects to expand his new home. It was the happiest time of his life, though he was clandestinely doing something else as well, preparing to become king. See, some of those architects started quietly taking trips on his dime, studying opera houses in Italy and France.
Ooh.
He also immersed himself in philosophical writing, producing his first book, The Anti-Machiavel, an idealistic refutation of Machiavelli's The Prince. In the book, Frederick argues in favor of an enlightened absolutist monarch who would provide a moral example to his people and keep them healthy and happy. He then sent the manuscript to the French philosopher Voltaire, who edited it and prepared it for anonymous publication.
Wow.
Though his identity did leak immediately, it would eventually become a bestseller, with readers hoping to gain a window into Frederick's mind. And perhaps the greatest insights could be found in a section on the type of wars he considered just. It contains some of the things you'd expect, such as defensive wars or wars of last resort, but also what Frederick called wars of interest. In such a war, a king realizes an enemy is going to declare war on him in the future and preemptively attacks them in order to gain the greatest military advantage. Was Frederick already considering the moves he'd make during his reign? Well, it's possible. Though by this time, he had become adept at keeping people at a distance, hiding behind a series of masks and personas that sometimes contradicted one another. And more often than not, he adopted the part of a misanthropic loner. Some historians see this as a survival tactic.
Dang, I didn't think I would relate so hard to you, Frederick. We're the same, you and I. Oh boy. Yeah.
A response to trauma and an attempt to hide his sexuality. But it did mean that even for close friends and ministers, it was really difficult to get inside Frederick's head. So it's hard to say exactly how Frederick felt in May of 1740, when he got word that his father was dying. Rushing to the palace in Berlin, they had time for one last talk. And it turned out that while opposite on all else, their political ambitions aligned. Both dreamed of uniting the scattered territories of Brandenburg, Prussia, currently sprinkled through the Holy Roman Empire or embedded with Poland.
Dude, I understand this for sure, because I was looking at the map of, like, Prussia at the time, I'm like, dang, like, it must be, like, a part of me that just hates seeing things scattered, but, like, even when I'm playing, like, games, like, war games or whatnot, I don't like my territories not connected. You know, like stuff like this would make me like want to declare war just to unite and have everything under like one banner, because it just in my mind it just looks better and it feels better. So like this is just like this would piss me off looking at it. So again, I oddly find myself, I don't like the way I'm relating to Frederick too much here, but yeah. Also, just naturally, you want your kingdom to be bigger and stronger, but Yeah, it's just like this, all the jumping around and scattered around, just ugh.
And both thought their kingdom could be one of the great nations of Europe. Then, on March 31st, 1740, Frederick William died in the arms of the son he'd tormented. But Frederick was
Apologies for all the pauses. I keep getting calls from random numbers at the moment that are starting to annoy me. But yeah, back to this.
wasn't left alone. For now, he had the most efficient bureaucracy in Europe, an unmatched recruitment system, an army of 80,000, and an enormous war chest of funds, an amount his father had amassed by avoiding foreign wars. The Soldier King had, ironically, relied chiefly on clever diplomacy and never fully used the army he'd built.
Mm-hmm.
King Frederick II, however, would.
Mm-hmm.
But first, some fun. Frederick's immediate move after his father's death was to build an opera house. He wanted to invest in the arts and sciences, which, ironically enough, his father had defunded so badly that they actually had to borrow soloists from Saxony to sing at his funeral.
Dang.
Next up, no longer requiring a wife to mollify his father, Frederick sent poor Elizabeth Christine to a palace outside Berlin. She wasn't even invited to his coronation.
Wow.
Instead, he brought an Italian philosopher who was likely his lover, and the pair followed it up with a foreign trip together where they met Voltaire. Then, with all of that out of the way, Frederick prepared for a war of interest. October 20th, 1740, Vienna. Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor and sovereign of the Habsburg dominions, is dead. All his life, Charles had been terrified that he would only have daughters, and because the laws of the Habsburg dominions said women could not inherit, his scattered territories would fragment in a succession crisis when he died. To prevent this, he'd issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713, declaring that a woman could inherit the Habsburg lands, and he spent most of his reign trying to get his neighbors to agree to it. Good thing, too, since his daughter Maria Theresa proved his most viable heir. Ironically, a woman Frederick tried to marry when he was searching for a bride. Now that'd be an alternate history novel worth reading. Charles had essentially bankrupted Austria in trying to bribe the great states into accepting the Pragmatic Sanction, a document they immediately backed off of as soon as he was dead. Austria's military was also weakened from a series of major wars, meaning the vultures were circling, seeing what they could pick off the Habsburg corpse. Of course, Austria also had something Frederick wanted. Silesia, a province that made up a third of Austrian revenue and sat right across the border from Brandenburg.
Yeah, it was one of the most, I believe, what do you say, financially strong areas. That's why Frederick coveted it so much. And again, like I said, I like Maria Theresa a lot. She's probably one of my favorite women historical figures that we've covered. I mean, there really haven't been many, because most of history is really just, yeah, it's mainly the dudes are kind of taking the center stage, you know. So very seldomly do I come across like women historical figures that are in charge of kingdoms or empires or even involved in war. So again, she's like one of the few that I've covered on this channel, and overall I have like nothing but a lot of respect for her. And again, like I said, she inherited such a crap show that the fact that she managed to pull Austria out of that is nothing short of just a amazing strong character, which is why I became such a fan of her, you know, and why she's solidly um solidly one of my favorite, I guess you can say, yeah, female historical figures.
But Frederick needed to make his move soon. Wait too long, and Saxony might take Silesia first, blocking Prussian expansion south. In 6 weeks, lightning speed in 18th century standards, Frederick had mobilized his army and crossed the border into Silesia. It was so easy at first, so much so that he could not have imagined that this act would set in motion a chain of events that would bring bloodshed not just to Central Europe, but to places as far away as Senegal, Brazil, India, and the Philippines. The First Silesian War and the War of Austrian Succession had begun. Prussian forces were practically unopposed, sweeping up the lightly defended province and taking forts. But Maria Theresa, who would become Frederick's lifelong rival, raised an army and began to oppose him. And so, Frederick II fought in his first battle. Molwitz, April 10th, 1741. As the Austrian cavalry comes at his right flank, Frederick realizes his mistake. He'd tried to run this battle like an exercise, like he was drilling troops. When they'd come upon the Austrians, they could have simply charged into the smaller, unready army, but instead, he'd formed up, putting his grenadiers between his cavalry, like the great Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus did in the 30 Years' War. A formation that would let the infantry murder cavalry with shots before his own mounted troops could countercharge. A battle plan out of a history book. It isn't working. Instead, the Austrians...
Yeah, that's like some, like... Yeah, he's not battle tested yet, right? There's a difference between learning and then the real thing, right? I'd imagine. So definitely, again, he has a great foundation, no doubt, of military tactics and strategy. But I guess what separates a more armchair general between a more actual one, I guess, is the actual part of being in battles, and I feel like that's something I would do. Like, I'd be like, ooh, yes, let me try this tactic from Napoleon, and then just crap, you know. Granted, though, Frederick needed to learn somewhere, and I believe it's in this battle that he retreated, or at least his wing did. And I think they still won, but he had fled, so that kind of... He lost some aura, if I'm remembering. But it's fine, because, you know, everyone has to start somewhere. This is literally his first time in the thick of fighting, so everyone has to learn somewhere, even the greats, and that's why it's like, you know, I don't really hold this much against him.
horse crashes into the right wing of his army and envelops it. His cavalry are standing still when the charge connects. The units mix in a battle of swords and pistols. And Frederick's in the thick of the fighting. It's confused and bloody. There's driving snow and fog, and both sides have white uniforms. The Prussian infantry and artillery keeps firing into their own ranks, mistaking comrades for the enemy. And the Prussian cavalry are starting to rout. Gustavus Adolphus, he thinks. Oh God. This is how Gustavus Adolphus died, mixed with the enemy, lost in fog. Suddenly, a man grabs his reins. It's his general. He tells Frederick to flee the field. The battle seems lost, and if he falls, Prussia will too, for he has no heir. So Frederick turns his great charger and bolts toward the nearest town. And he doesn't see that behind him, while his cavalry has broken, the well-drilled Prussian infantry starts to move across the field like solid walls, firing in steady volleys, driving off the Austrian cavalry attack. It is Frederick's first battle, and he's running away. But his infantry, the great gift from his father, will stand and fight. Oh man, Zoe, what a cliffhanger! You know, I don't think I'm going to be able to wait.
Let's see. Okay, so again, everyone has to start somewhere. But now he knows.
April 11th, 1741. It's the morning after the Battle of Mulwitz. Frederick has had his first victory, and he's not happy about it. See, his general had told him to flee, that his army was about to be destroyed, so he had done so. Yet then that same general had turned the battle around and delivered victory. Meanwhile, Frederick had wandered in the dark, nearly being captured and hiding in a house until morning. He was embarrassed, but he had learned a great deal. Mulwitz would be his school. Never again would he abdicate command to another or cut his losses.
Again, it's like they say, failure in a sense, or setbacks, are the best teacher, right? Or just experience in general. And again, there's a difference between learning about it, military, and then actually being a part in the thick of fighting. So, you know, but now this is the beginning of him learning, and Frederick, as we know, would go on to be incredibly great. So, overall, yeah, this is a good learning point and a good starting point, I think, for him.
When victory seemed possible. His cavalry had performed poorly, he needed to do something about that, but he also saw how his advancing infantry had terrified the enemy. Something to note there. And though improvements did need to be made, he had his victory. He had Silesia, and he would fight to keep it for 22 years. Thanks so much to Ren for being a simple and effective way to help make a difference in the climate crisis. Learn more after the episode. Frederick's invasion of Silesia, on the thinnest pretenses and without even a formal declaration of war, catapulted him to international stardom. Across Europe, people scrambled to learn all they could about this rash and dynamic young king. How had a nothing power like Prussia, a scattershot part of the Holy Roman Empire, caught the mighty Habsburgs napping? Sales of his book, The Anti-Machiavel, shot up, and his correspondence with Voltaire, written on both sides with the intention that it be shared, circulated among philosophers. When Frederick had invaded, he told his ministers that he wanted to see his name in the gazettes, and boy did he get that. But in truth, this was not all about Frederick's enormous ego. It was also about putting Prussia on the map. When he came to the throne, Prussia would—
Yeah, his star is rising, and yeah, it's easy to forget that Prussia ain't a great power yet. It is still small potatoes, as the kids tend to say. But it's really due to Frederick's reign that Prussia became a great power. So, yeah, you can see that. The star is rising for Prussia.
was neither a fully independent kingdom nor a state in the Holy Roman Empire. It existed in the shadowland in between. The soil was sandy and poor, its territory separated, and the population only numbered 2.2 million, meaning forget a superpower like Habsburg Austria. Before the war, Prussia's biggest rival was neighboring Saxony. Yet by invading Silesia, he announced that Prussia was attempting to join the great nations of Europe. This wasn't some German state, this was a kingdom. But despite his boldness crossing the border, when he entered Silesia, most of Europe assumed Austria would crush this upstart. But then Mollwitz proved them wrong and changed everything. It exposed Austria's weakness. And if you've ever watched any of our episodes on the Siege of Vienna, or Jewish pirates, or the 30 Years' War, you'd know that about 80% of Europe at this time was spoiling to take a swing at the Habsburgs. Many in Europe, including Frederick, also fundamentally hated the idea of Maria Theresa, a woman heading one of the great powers. Not only did they not want her ruling Austria, they also wanted to break the tradition of the Habsburg line automatically being elected Holy Roman Emperor. Of course, in this case, a woman couldn't legally be elected, but Maria was pushing for her husband's election. So, sensing weakness after Mollwitz, France, Spain, Bavaria, and Saxony pounced. And thus, the First Silesian War became merely a part of the much wider War of Austrian Succession. And if all of that sounds complicated, it's because it is. Sadly, we're going to have to gloss over a bunch of stuff since this is a series about Frederick and not this unbelievably convoluted war where countries change sides faster than Loki's in the MCU. But basically what you need to know is that at Mollwitz, Frederick had rung the dinner bell. Habsburg's back on the menu, boys. Get a piece while it lasts. A coalition formed around Prussia with the hope of carving up—
Yeah. Poor Austria, bro. These guys can't catch a break. I've said this before, but I can't tell in my head who has the worst luck. Like, I kind of coined a phrase on this channel, the Austrian bad luck strikes again, because holy crap, dude, these guys just go through it. Every time I cover the Austrian Habsburgs, I'm just like, can these guys ever catch a break? It's like the world has it out for, really had it out for them, their entire existence. And that's why I was very much sympathetic towards Maria Theresa in this time, you know? Like, you know, let alone, like, yeah, a woman taking power, definitely, as we are covering, was something that a lot of powers didn't like in a more male-dominated— you really think about it, like, the women kind of taking more center stage is kind of still kind of a recent thing in history, huh? Like, most of history, women usually weren't all that, you know, directly, like, ruling or involved in, like, wars or stuff. So, like, I feel like the advancement of women's in, like, history, it's kind of still more of a recent developing thing when you really think about it. But, yeah, overall, like, first of all, that's already bad enough. But the fact that she is in control at a time where Austria is super weak and still trying to, like, get its crap together is just a recipe for disaster. Again, the fact that Austria makes it out of this is still amazing. That's why I really love Maria Theresa and such a big fan of her.
Habsburg lands in a partition. But Frederick worried that if that happened, these powers might get too powerful and overwhelm Prussia as well. So, Frederick's diplomats contacted their Austrian counterparts and cut a deal. They signed a secret truce so that both could recover strength, while their troops still pretended to be at war. This lasted for a few months until Frederick, worried Maria Theresa was coming back for Silesia, repudiated the treaty and joined the Allied campaign in Bohemia. But not long after Frederick arrived, the Allied march toward Vienna broke up. So turned out, it was Frederick's army that took the blow when Maria Theresa's brother-in-law, Charles of Lorraine, arrived with 30,000 troops to take the invaded territory back. And on May 17th, 1742, pursuing Austrians caught half of the Prussian army. Dug in around a village to meet the Austrian attack, they were instructed to hold until the king's part of the army could arrive and take direct command. Frederick was not about to let a mere general steal his thunder again, okay? But once he arrived, it was still a confused engagement. Frederick drove off the Austrian cavalry with a mounted charge backed by artillery, but it was a dry summer day, and soon, huge banks of dust obscured any vision of the battlefield. Central command broke down. Cavalry on both sides got lost, then quit the battle to pillage the enemy baggage trains. It then became a house-to-house brawl of infantry and artillery through the burning town that only ended when Frederick led a huge square of 24 battalions into the Austrian flank. Now, while technically a draw, the Austrians abandoned the field, giving Frederick the victory. Not to mention, diplomatically, he also won out. For when the British pushed both parties to the negotiating table, Frederick once again was allowed to keep almost all of Silesia. 2 months later, the First Silesian War was over. Yet he knew this was a temporary peace, and that there was work to do. While the Prussian infantry was solid, the cavalry had performed poorly in both battles. So he went about restructuring and reforming his cavalry forces to be more disciplined and aggressive, so they'd serve him better when Maria Theresa came for her captured province. Oh, and she was going to. In fact, Maria Theresa had flipped the script. 2 years before, she'd been fighting alone against a major coalition, but now she'd set up a new anti-French alliance bankrolled by Britain. And with Russia and Saxony interested in joining, Frederick worried she was about to seek revenge. So then he built a rival alliance between Prussia, Bavaria, Sweden, and 2 German states, with the goal of restoring the Bavarian lands taken so far in the war. France also declared its support. Then on August 15th, 1744, Frederick crossed back into Bohemia, launching the Second Silesian War, which went sideways almost immediately. The campaign depended on the French tying up Charles of Lorraine and his Austrians in the west, so he couldn't return to Bohemia. But that went out the window when King Louis XV fell ill leading the French army, and Charles disengaged. Then Saxony switched sides away from France and allied with Austria, meaning Prussia now had an enemy on its border. Meanwhile, Austrian guerrilla forces hounded Frederick out of Bohemia by just savaging his supply lines. And realizing this was unattainable, he pulled back to defend Silesia. Things got worse. Austria formed a new alliance with Britain, Saxony, and the Dutch Republic, with secret plans to partition Prussia the same way the powers had tried to carve up the Habsburg lands. Then Frederick's—
Yeah, like you've heard the saying that hell have no fury like a woman scorned, and holy crap, like, did Frederick find a way to piss off all the most powerful women in the world? Between Maria Theresa and what was it, the Tsar, the Tsar of Russia at the time, what was a woman, the Tsar, what's the female way of saying Tsar? I apologize, I forgot. But point is, you know, Frederick had a way of pissing off every woman in the world at this point, which is hilarious. But yeah, and again, like, hell have no fury like a woman scorned. Maria Theresa made this man's life suffer. Like, he took Silesia, and she never got over it. She did everything to make it like a living hell for him to keep it. And in that front, she succeeded. Did she lose Silesia at the end? Yes, and that still is a loss to Austria. But she still, I think, inflicted a great amount of misery on Frederick, which, as we covered from the House of History series, between the depression and the suicidal thoughts and feelings, she inflicted a lot of emotional damage on this man and a lot of stress. So in some ways, I like to think she got a good amount of revenge back on Frederick.
ally, the Holy Roman Emperor, dropped dead, and his son made peace with Austria, and finally in May, Charles of Lorraine crossed the giant mountains into Lower Silesia, leading a force of 60,000 Austrian and Hungarian troops, plus their Saxon allies. Frederick knew he had to act. Battle of Hohenfriedberg, June 4th, 1745, 7 a.m. Frederick told his troops to leave their campfires burning when they performed the night march. In darkness, they'd slipped out of camp and crowded across a bridge, right past the Austrian forces, for they were not the objective. Instead, Frederick wants to hit the Saxons first and destroy them before rolling up on the rest of the Austrian forces. Oh, but they've been spotted. Shots ring out. Prussian and Saxon cavalry clash together in a vicious night battle. Pistol flashes light up gleaming sword blades. The Saxon camp begins to mobilize, but the infantry pushes through, and the Saxon formations start to dissolve. By first light, the Saxon force is already routed, and Frederick's right turns to engage the main Austrian force. Hours of gunpowder and blood follow, and the next day, Frederick sits on his horse in the courtyard of the palace he's taken as his own. He has won his greatest victory to date, and now he is honoring the troops that, more than anything, made it possible. The Bayreuth Dragoons, his heavy cavalry. At the climax of the battle, when things had still hung in the balance, they had spotted a hole in the Austrian line. And by charging through that gap, they had overrun 20 enemy battalions and captured 2,500 prisoners. They'd broken the Austrians and only taken 94 casualties doing so. Now they parade their war trophies into the square, 67 battle flags of Austrian and Saxon units torn from enemy hands. There was still fighting to do, but when the king returned to Berlin, he would be doing so under a new name, Frederick the Great.
And, actually, on that note of fighting still to do, I kind of want to switch gears and talk for a second.
Overall, yeah, that's the great thing about Frederick. He learned quite well and adapted, like the whole cavalry thing. He was really great. He's a really great military mind, and I know I said earlier that I felt like he never dominated the war. He merely survived it. That's not really a diss on that. I didn't mean that as like a diss in regards to his military prowess. Like, he really is perhaps, perhaps even the greatest of his age, but it was more of a manpower thing and him just holding on. But he got some of the coolest victories that I think we covered on this channel, and overall, just he was really great with the military stuff. So I could never take that away from him. He was a great commander, and definitely worthy of the title,
The Battle of Kolin, June 18th, 1757. Frederick's army is running. The year before, he'd invaded neutral Saxony, forcing its troops into his military and snatching the treasury to fund his war effort. Then he'd struck into Bohemia to besiege Prague, but the Austrians caught him there, causing him to split his forces in order to meet the oncoming army. He had struck at them first, as was his style, utilizing his signature oblique attack, where he concentrated his forces on one side of the enemy line. But his troops had been baited into attacking too early, before they were ideally positioned. His frontal assault had melted under Austrian firepower, an element not emphasized in his tight marching formations, and now, hours later, the Prussians have lost nearly 14,000 men, and they've had enough. Rascals! Frederick strikes out with the flat of his sword, shouting at a retreating unit, "Do you want to live forever?" It's a strange choice of phrase, because while thousands of troops have died for his ambitions, it's actually Frederick himself that will in fact live forever. Thanks so much to Ground News for supporting today's historical tale. The Third Silesian War would give Frederick some of his most legendary victories on the field of battle, but also his most catastrophic defeats, with Prussia nearly being wiped off the map. But these battles were not just important militarily, mind you. They also formed a sort of proto-nationalism, where civilians at home were following, analyzing, and reading commentaries of his battles, almost as they would a sport, but more dramatic. And that fact really got us thinking in the old extra history lab, because unfortunately we don't have time or budget to go through all of his 16 battles, But, thanks to my illustrious cat's wonderful suggestion, perhaps we would have the ability to fill you in about it through a different performative art form. Sports entertainment.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, extra historians, let's get ready to rumble!
Yeah, a big part of Frederick's career is just the, like, I know usually with extra history, the battles are in the main focus. They focus more on the individual, and they'll kind of like explain a battle like, oh, this happened, but then move on. Like it's more like Kings and Generals and Epic History and History March, for example, that cover the battle. Like the battle is the more important part rather than the things going on around it. Though they do obviously touch on the things going around it. While Extra History kind of feels like one of those channels that's more inverse. They cover more of the political situation, the individuals, while the battles are just something they fought, this happened, and then move back. But the thing with Frederick is that the battles are kind of the biggest part of his like life, so it's almost impossible to just kind of skim through or just not mention them completely, So this is interesting. And yeah, I used to be a big WWE fan when I was a kid. Like, The Undertaker was like my favorite wrestler. So, I mean, I haven't watched wrestling since like 2013, so I kind of grew out of it, I guess. But there was a time I was such a really big sports entertainment fan. And kind of in a weird way, when I'm watching these videos, I feel like this is my only source of entertainment. Like I said, I don't watch movies or shows off of YouTube. Like, I only watch them to make YouTube videos nowadays, and all my entertainment comes from YouTube and these videos. So it kind of feels like I'm watching like a television show. I've often described these series we covered like shows, and I even call the historical characters in it, like Frederick or stuff, like characters. Not that I'm trying to undermine the seriousness of the situation, or that I know this all happened and actual people suffered and died. It's just like, in a weird way, I kind of treat this channel almost like I'm watching a television show when we're covering the lives of these people. But again, I don't mean it in like a disrespectful way. I just mean it like it's literally my only source of entertainment and like learning, Also, it's just kind of fun too, but oh well.
Hey there, folks at home. I'm Extra History Narrator Matt.
And I'm casual wrestling fan Matt. Sup?
And we'll be your commentators for tonight.
And you know what a night it is in the EH Arena?
You said it, Cash Matt. If you remember last week, Frederick invaded neutral Saxony. A move so aggressive, it spawned a 4-on-1 match. Prussia against Russia, France, Sweden, and the Habsburgs, leading much of the Holy Roman Empire.
You can only hope that this territory grabbing and attacking neutral allies won't serve as some sort of precedent for future German leaders. But wait, oh, dang, there's the bell.
All right, opening moves. The Russians have invaded East Prussia. Sweden has entered Pomerania.
Oh, big hits.
France and Austria are dancing into core Prussian territory too.
Huh, looks like a partition of Prussia.
Oh my! Frederick has smashed into the French army double his size. 10,000 French casualties to only 1,000 Prussian.
Holy crap.
Yikes, yeah, they knocked them right out of the ring. Looks like now they're hanging back outside the ropes.
But wait, Frederick's dashed over to the Austrians in Silesia now. Again, a force twice his size. Is he jabbing at their left side?
Oh, sucker punch from the right. Oh, that is a third of Austrian forces gone. 2 major victories in 1 month. That is impressive.
But Russia's entered Brandenburg. Looks like Fritz is fighting them off, but...
Oh, we were expecting this. Here come the Austrians.
Oh, surprise attack. Frederick loses 30% of his army in a strategic blunder.
And there is the bell. Time to pause for winner.
Indeed, indeed. What do you think so far, Cash Matt?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I think it's still too close to call, but Frederick has one huge advantage, in my opinion. 3 important words: unity of command. His enemies have to negotiate strategy and coordinate movements between them, communicating with capitals as far away as Moscow, blah, 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 blah. But if Frederick gets an idea, he just gets to do it.
It's true. Frederick coming in with like a steel chair to smack. Oh boy. Do you like those wrestling run-ins where like Paul, who took control of Russia, rushes in? Stuff like that. Oh boy. But it's true, this is a really solid, I'm sorry, like this is actually kind of really hilarious. Because it's bringing me back to my old like WWE fanboy days. But It's true though. Like sometimes unity is a big part. Like yeah, the coalition is beyond dangerous because of the multiple. Like you have Russia in the east, you have France, and then you have um Sweden, just on all fronts attacking Prussia. But at the end, a big part of why the coalition fell apart is because yeah, they had to kind of you know work together, and that's not easy among European powers. Usually, there's always drama. Like the friggin' Crusades are like the best example of Europeans trying to work all together. And usually all the Crusades were just kind of giant crap shows, So, for Frederick, despite being super numerically outmatched, that unity can play a big part in that. Yeah, there's only he does something, he can do it, and he can be more decisive while the other powers have to actually coordinate and talk to each other, and there's like pre-existing rivalries, so there's tension all the time. So yeah, like overall it does go to show. And another thing that I'm glad he mentioned is yeah, Frederick took L's in this war. Like he wasn't just dominating every battle, minimal casualties, like he took losses, and even some of his victories were kind of almost pyrrhic in nature with how he lost, a good amount of men. So I remember when we were covering the House of History series, I just kept thinking, how much manpower does this man have? Because he was losing a lot of guys in victories and in defeats. I was like, holy crap, where is like Prussia getting the manpower from? That was the part that scared me and gave me most anxiety during watching that, because like Frederick was going up against much more populated areas, much more populous nations, but overall, it ended up working for him. He held on.
He is both king and battlefield general, and that is invaluable.
Yep.
Oh, but that's a disadvantage too. I mean, look at Hokiar. A regular general wouldn't have made that mistake. But since he's king, he doesn't have to listen to his generals. Not to mention his experience at Malvitz means he keeps fighting when he should really cut his losses.
Fair. But you know what? I tell you who he should listen to is his brother, Henry. That kid is a much more careful general overall, and dude's undefeated, right? Frederick's lost like what, half his battles?
Oh, wait, hate to cut you off, Cash, but it looks like Frederick's talking to the fight doctor about how to overdose on opium if things get worse.
Oh my gosh.
Can we get a mic down there?
Okay, how you feeling, Fritz? Fortune has it in for me. Fate, she is a woman, and I am not in that way inclined. Let's go.
Well, all right. Coming out strong in round 2, I guess.
Whoops, speak of the devil, there's that bell. Man, they are really on him now. Oh, Berlin is...
What the fuck? That's true. Holy crap. Even like joking about this poor guy. The guy was actually thinking about suicide a lot during that war because he was mentally going through it. Just, yeah, just in case. Oh my gosh, that was hilarious. Holy crap. Yeah, I'm not into women, so it's fine. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, this is the most joking thing I've ever seen. Yeah, Extra History usually doesn't do stuff like this, but this is a new thing to witness, but it's still kind of really funny.
Open for the taking.
Oh, but wait a minute. Russia and Austria seem to be arguing. They're withdrawing?
Boom! Frederick scores a major hit against Austria. Man, though, these fighters, they look exhausted. I don't know how much longer they're going to be able to keep this up. I mean, Prussia's army is down to like 60,000 men, and like, what, the Russians are in Berlin?
Yeah, well, this might be the end for... Oh my god. Empress Elizabeth of Russia has just collapsed. And who's that picking up the crown?
Wow, that is her nephew, Peter III, a huge Frederick fan.
I kept saying Paul, it was Peter. Holy crap, I forgot this guy's name. I was on the right mind track though, right? I kept saying Paul. No, it's Peter. All I knew him is the Frederick the Great fanboy whose reign lasted like 8 months, right? Before Catherine just got rid of him. To be fair, I think people would kind of a little bit forgive me for this one. But Yeah, talk about the luckiest break in history. Holy crap. This dude who just happens to be a Frederick the Great fanboy taking control of Russia, that's a literal miracle that struck Frederick the Great. Like, fortune is a fickle thing, and we've seen great. Usually in history, it's great men with great fortune who turns on them. Like Napoleon started off great and fortunate, his fortune turned around, and he ultimately lost. Or like even like the greats like Alexander or Caesar were super fortunate guys who kind of met tragic ends. Like we've seen fortune start off great for people and then turn awful for them. Frederick the Great's like one of the rare few examples where we see all the bad things happened to him off the bat. He started off with, I would say, pretty low fortune, but then it reversed. It did the opposite, and then he gained great fortune, like with this. Like he's one of the rare few times where we've seen that be like the opposite happened, you know? Which is pretty unique, makes him really unique in my mind.
And boy, I even hear he dresses up as Frederick sometimes.
That's
Mhm.
weird.
Yep, Peter III's a weird dude, man.
Well, he switched sides, withdrawing Russian troops from Berlin and giving back East Prussia. That is a
Dang.
miracle. Frederick's made peace with Sweden as well, and now can focus on Austria.
Oh man, what a reversal. I mean, now a Prussian-Russian alliance will do—
But wait,
oh.
here comes Empress Catherine with a folding chair. Peter III is deposed. What a slobber knocker!
Holy
And now
crap. With the steel chair he has, just from the back. Oh boy. This rocks. I'm sad Extra History doesn't do much stuff like that, because this is hilarious.
she's throwing up the deuces. Russia is out of the war. Wow, what a great move from Catherine.
Oh, wow, true that, my friend. I think we're going to be hearing more from her in the future.
Now it looks like the ref is bringing out the negotiating table.
Oh, yeah, there it is. That is the end. There is the bell. And 7 years of war in Europe has ended.
Indeed, tens of thousands dead to affirm that. Check here. Oh, yeah, all the borders go back to where they were before the war.
Yep.
Well, that was pointless. Night, folks.
Man, I wish I was taught history via wrestling in school. Where were we? Oh, yeah, Prussia.
That might be my favorite Extra History segment of all time. That was hilarious, and it perfectly captures everything. All that crap, ultimately for nothing. But again, like I said, Frederick the Great, he's the only one of the few historical figures who, like I said, it's just so weird because when you think about it, like how many great generals start off great and then fall off or meet unfortunate ends. Frederick started off kind of on a bad foot, unfortunate, and then his fortune turned around and he ended up on a much better note. Well, at least his kingdom, granted, eventually the dude was destroyed after the war, no doubt, but still, he still won. He's still a winner in that sense, even if a very traumatized and yeah. The point is, you get what I mean, right? Like that's what makes him unique among the other greats. And yeah.
Survived with its conquests intact, but barely. Plus, Frederick was in no less danger. He'd had 6 horses shot out from under him during the war, and the years of campaigning had aged him. Shaken by how close he'd come to ruin, Frederick would avoid war for the rest of his reign.
Mm-hmm.
And, I kind of hate that we're saying it like that, the rest of his reign, because Frederick actually did so much domestically. But it is hard to balance that story amid his battles.
Mm-hmm.
Frederick's rule was one of centralization. As an enlightened absolutist, he believed a strong monarch was necessary to push forward Enlightenment ideals in government policy, with a king as servant and first citizen of the country. He reformed Prussia's legal code to mostly eliminate torture, and repealed most capital offenses, so only a handful of executions occurred each year. He opened government positions up to those of lower social ranks, and started an organized grain storage program in order to keep food prices stable and provide bread during famines. Also, as a patron of the arts, he funded philosophers, artists, and musicians, personally composing 121 sonatas and 4 concertos with the flute. And when Johann Sebastian Bach visited the court, the two actually had a jam session.
Dang.
And all the while, he was still prolifically writing histories, poems, and books on battlefield tactics. He also reformed Prussian agriculture by reclaiming Prussian forests and draining swamplands. And while potatoes were already present in Germany as animal feed, he actually recast them as food fit for human consumption, convincing Prussians that they were valuable by sending royal guards to stand around potato fields. Then, in 1772, in one of his most notorious and consequential actions, he managed to avoid a renewed war with the Habsburgs by proposing that Prussia, Austria, and Russia carve up Poland between them, each taking a large piece.
Yep.
Now, there was, of course, no justification for this action, which was against the will of the vast majority of my own ancestors, but in doing so, he did gain the Poland-held province of West Prussia, finally making him.
Yep. Yeah, in some ways he never changed, old Freddy boy, you know? But, well, he needed to do what he needed to do to survive. Holy crap.
The king of Prussia rather than king in Prussia, and uniting his expanded territory. Frederick had no children, for obvious reasons, having spent most of his later life with his personal valet, who had a bedroom next to his.
Oh my gosh.
And when he died in 1786, at the age of 74, his kingdom went to his nephew, and his body went into a vault next to his abusive father, even though he specifically requested to be buried at Sanssouci next to his greyhounds. In
Dang.
death, Frederick left an odd legacy, since his contradictory personality meant people could read whatever they wanted into him. German nationalists revered him as a national hero, ignoring that he cared nothing about a wider Germany and despised German language and culture. During the Weimar Republic, Berlin's rising gay culture adopted him as a symbol, and he was also a favorite of Hitler, who justified his expansionism with Frederick's historical example. Though, to be clear, Frederick had zero interest in ethno-nationalism. His reputation fell as a result after World War II, though historians began reappraising him after German reunification, which was when his grave was finally moved to Sanssouci as he wished.
Oh, wow.
But perhaps
That's nice.
he received no greater compliment than that from Napoleon himself, who, when he defeated the Fourth Coalition, paid a visit to Frederick's tomb. "Gentlemen," he said, "if this man was still alive, I would not be here." If that's not a legacy, I don't know what is. But actually, backing up for a moment, just how interesting is it that so many disparate groups of people found elements of Frederick to latch on?
It makes sense. Like I said, I mentioned in the beginning, Frederick kind of falls in a weird neutral category with me. There's so much I admire and kind of like I'm cool with him with, and then there are other parts I'm like, dude, no. like no, bro. But either way, I guess that just kind of made me what history always kind of views him as. He's a divisive person in some ways. Yeah, so overall, this was really interesting. This seems to be the main end of the main series, at least. Yeah, there's only a song apparently, instrumental music, and the lies thing. So overall, yeah, like I said, Frederick is such an interesting guy to me. And there's so much that to admire and also kind of be a bit iffy about him with. But overall, still is, without dispute, in my opinion, a great man. And, you know, when I use the term great, I'm obviously talking about in terms of accomplishment and deed, not in, like, a personal way, like you would describe your friend as, oh yeah, he's a great guy. Like, you know, I mean, like, great in terms of, like, what he accomplished when I'm calling people in this channel great. And Frederick is a great man who ultimately set Prussia on the course of becoming what it would be. So his legacy and his accomplishments will always be remembered, and overall, just, yeah, it was really cool to get a look into Frederick again. So I'm going to end the video right here, and I'll see you guys next time for the next one. Bye, everyone.